We do not know whether they have American markings or if they indeed are bits of ammunition from U.S. weaponry. That's clearly one of the questions that will be asked. But the Russians are saying very clearly that the armor that they confronted was not Iraqi armor, that it was American armor, and that they were in a convoy which was clearly marked as a diplomatic convoy, and that they clearly tried for a period of time to signal to the Americans that they were not a threat, and that they were diplomats trying to leave Baghdad. Wolf?
Sheila McVicker with the latest on that sensitive issue, reporting live from Damascus. We'll be checking back with you, Sheila, for more. Thanks very much. We're continuing to watch the skies over Baghdad right now, as well as what's happening on the streets of Baghdad. More explosions being heard as we speak right now. Explosions, we're not sure they're coming from the skies, whether bombs or missiles are coming from the ground. Artillery fire, mortar fire. We do know that U.S. military personnel, soldiers, Marines, have been making these thrusts into the Iraqi capital. That is a continuing feature as this day unfolds. We'll continue to keep our eyes on the skies of Baghdad and continue to watch what's going on. We're also looking at other news, other major developments today in the war on Iraq, including President Bush. He is now scheduled to arrive in Northern Ireland in less than 2 hours. Our Suzanne Malveaux is there with a preview of talks between the president and the Prime Minister, Tony Blair. CNN special coverage of the war in Iraq will continue after this short break.
We've really seen, though, is an incredible plan that General Franks put in place, and how quickly that plan has worked, and just how much control that we've been able to exert in less than 3 weeks now in the country, and how many of the resources of the country we've been able to secure for the future of the Iraqi people. I think as members of Congress look at what's happening, they have to feel good about the capability that we've tried to work hard to provide for the military, and what our military's done with it.
Now, very early, of course, we're still early on. This thing is only about 2.5 weeks old, but
right.
The first week, we heard a lot of naysayers come out from the Washington Post, the New York Times, et cetera, saying that this thing had huge problems, supply line problems, not enough personnel, et cetera. Did you ever have any doubt that, in fact, those reports were dead wrong and our military knew just what they were doing?
I did not have any doubt that those reports were wrong. In fact, they were so reminiscent of the reports that had come out just months earlier in Afghanistan. I think we were in a quagmire, according to some commentators in Afghanistan, about 2 days before it was over. And what we've seen here is exactly the plan the military put in place, getting operational control throughout the entire country almost immediately. That helped minimize the chances that Israel could be attacked with the weapons that Iraq had in the West, secured the economic future for the Iraqis by quickly capturing the oil fields and then their airports, and moving so quickly to the capital. In fact, I would think that when we study military history in the future, this will be seen as a classic campaign where you combine the best technology of weapons with rapid movement.
Now, I just want to, again, alert our viewers, forgive me, Congressman, but these are live shots from Abu Dhabi television. They say that the Iraqis now claim they were taking shots with artillery or with rocket-propelled grenades, et cetera, at U.S. snipers that were around the El Rashid Hotel. That's what we're being told we're seeing. We're not sure if it's true. We're not sure if the only thing we are sure of is that there were huge explosions very close to where these pictures are being filled from. Congressman, I just got to ask you, the French and the Russians are trying to squirm their way back into Iraq. Do we do anything to keep them out?
I don't know that we do. I think we work hard now to see that they share their part of the burden. That would be my own personal view. It's not necessarily the view of the Congress or the administration, but they have a substantial obligation if they want to be part of building a post-war Iraq that moves toward democracy to now step up and help with the cost, not only the cost of the rebuilding, but the cost that we've had to incur to free the Iraqi people from this tyrant. We'll see if they're willing to do that.
As recently as December, though, some of the representatives from French Oil were in Baghdad, the city that you now see live being bombed. They were there giving presents to Saddam Hussein. What if they try to get back in oil-wise?
Well, I think we've known all the protest about this was about oil. The oil questions have been much more focused on other countries than us. We, to the credit of our military, worked hard to secure the oil fields, not for any American gain, but so that the Iraqi people would have control of that great asset. I think that's will be one of the big decisions now in post-conflict Iraq, is how you set up the oil resource so it can be controlled by the Iraqi people in a way that has maximum benefit for the country itself, unlike the previous years of where the maximum benefit has been for Saddam Hussein and his gang.
Yeah, once again, it's, we only saw about 5 or 6 or 7 oil wells burst up, but we know that they tried to sabotage a lot more than that. Our demolition teams were able to undo the damage that they were trying to do with those oil fields. But, Congressman, we're going back to live action now. I want to thank you so much for joining us, Congressman Roy Blunt, the House Majority Whip, and we want to go back to Rick Leventhal, who's outside of the city of Baghdad. You're looking at pictures from inside the city of Baghdad, where explosions about 5 or 10 minutes ago were going off in fast order. What you're seeing, we believe, are the remnants of those explosions. It appears that there are fires close to beyond that point where you see the palm trees on the left. We're switching back between Abu Dhabi. There you can see right under the Fox logo, it says exclusive Abu Dhabi. We're also getting Al Jazeera footage from different spots, but that's a close-up. They're using a close-up lens there to make the picture look closer, so we don't know how far away. You add in the night vision goggles, it makes it even more hard to distinguish what it is and how far away from the action we're looking. But Rick Leventhal is right there. Rick, you said you may have heard something from your vantage point outside of the city. Do you still hear anything?
Yeah, we heard a boom a short time ago out here. It was a loud boom, but I guess it was quite some distance away. You know, the responsibility of these guys is to try and prevent the Iraqi forces who may be outside the city from massing and trying to sneak in or make some kind of counterattack from the rear. And there is concern that all these guys who abandoned their tanks and artillery pieces might actually be gathering somewhere for some last desperate effort to kill U.S. forces. So that's sort of what we're on the lookout for here. And you know, the other thing, David, that I mentioned earlier that I just wanted to mention one more time is that, you know, when you see looting, which we have seen, we saw people looting a military base, taking anything they could get their hands on, including ceiling fans and bed frames and that sort of thing. And then tonight seeing all these people driving bobcats and stealing generators, you know, it suggests a loss of control, a loss of authority in the area. And if there's no policing, you know, it just I think it's evidence that things are changing here pretty dramatically.
It's also evidence that, above all, the Marines and the Army and everybody else can't let their guard down.
Absolutely. And again, that's been stressed here over the last 24, 48 hours to be vigilant, to keep the Kevlar and the vests on, you know, and keep your head on a swivel.
Now, Rick, have you seen any sign, or has there been any indication that some of these old remnants of the Republican Guard divisions have moved back in the city? Have you planned an attack on a division, then it suddenly disappears? Maybe the thinking being that it's gone back into Baghdad.
No, I can't say that I have. These military planners may know, you know, obviously know more about what may lie ahead than we do, but they clearly are set up in positions to try and prevent some sort of attack and to try and protect the forces that are there and that are continuing to move into Baghdad.
Rick, as long as you can, please stay with us. We're going to be going to another guest now, General Paul Vallely, one of our Fox military analysts. General, what about what we see or what we just saw in the past 20 minutes? We heard from the Iraqi sources, who, of course, lie more often than they tell the truth about things, that these were Iraqi bombs on targets of U.S. snipers around the El Rashid Hotel. Any chance that that might be true?
David, General McInerney and I were just looking at that live feed from the Arab network there, and it appears from looking at it, it's probably air-delivered munitions by our own air naval forces because of the burst and the spacing and the pulsating effect that you get from a very large ordnance versus an artillery or mortar shells coming in.
Well, General, as we're talking, we've got a live shot now, but let's go back, if we can. We've got a tape of what we saw earlier just to see. Okay, now this is tape. This is tape.
Yeah,
there we
right.
see exactly what you're talking about. From that particular explosion, you think that was delivered from air?
Yeah, that looks like a very big bomb, a 500-pounder perhaps, that's gone in there. And you can tell with the pulsating effect, even you get from the camera level, that it would be larger ordnance than an artillery shell or a mortar shell. But, you know, that's just our first take on it, David.
Now, the skies are not very clear over Baghdad. Would that affect any kind of bombing raid from a fighter or a bomber?
Well, it affects the laser-guided munitions, David, but it doesn't affect the joint attack direct munitions, the JDAMs, because that's all GPS-guided. So if, in fact, they've got targets in there that have been called in from our ground forces, they must have specific Special Republican Guard units or these pockets of resistance that they have picked up.
General, are you watching right now?
Yes.
Are these secondary explosions that I'm seeing here?
Well, they could well be, David. Pretty hard to tell whether it's a secondary or a follow-on drop munition there in that area. But it looks like we have continual ammunitions going into that particular area, and then perhaps with some secondary.
Now, the camera was literally close enough so that it shook at one point. I don't know if you can see it again. It was definitely not the wind, because you could tell that the flash and the shaking of the camera happened simultaneous. Does that indicate how far away from where the camera shot is the explosion actually took place?
Well, it does, David, and it looks like there's some distance between the camera shot and where that's happening. You know, it looks to me that it's out there 3 to 5 miles, perhaps, not within 500 meters. So that means, again, if you're getting that pulsating effect, an effect from a large explosion, it's probably heavy ordnance.
Now, we don't know if anything the Iraqis have said is true. Again, they lie more often than they tell the truth, but they did say this was happening near the Al Rashid Hotel. Can you go to the screenwriter and show us what targets of strategic importance might be around there?
Well, I can, David. If you look here where I've put the small circle on Tamu Street here, where the Al Rashid Hotel is, we see with the arrow pointing up there, that appears to be the area, the target area where these shells are falling right now, if the reports are correct, that it is in the Al Rashid area. But you can see where it is vis-a-vis the Tigris River, as well as the Ministry Council, the Presidential Palace that was occupied earlier. So this is all real close in right now, David.
Now, as we get in there, reports of uprising in Baghdad may be overrated at the moment. They may not have actually started in earnest, but we are, correct me if I'm wrong, getting a lot of good human intelligence. A lot of Iraqis have been coming to our columns, either within Baghdad or just outside of it, and giving us information that might help in bombing raids such as this one, right?
Well, absolutely right, David. I think we've been getting excellent intelligence from many of the higher-ranking individuals come over. And I understand that these uprisings in the Baghdad area are up in the northwest section, the Shula area, 2 locations up there. So I think the information that we can gather as we pick up more defectors and we pick up more civilians even that can pass on information where these pockets of resistance are located, and then we can go in and target them even with the ground forces or from the air.
If there is resistance, boy, there's one of those big bombs that you suggest is a little too big for artillery or certainly a grenade, a rocket-propelled grenade. Again, these are earlier from Abu Dhabi. If the resistance against the Saddam Hussein regime does pick up in Baghdad, as it did in Basra, or as it is in Basra now, how do we support these people without getting innocents killed?
Well, what we do, David, probably put in another mech brigade into the city area to spread out a little bit and get more cover, and enabling those forces then to protect more of the civilian areas. So I suspect we're going to see an infusion of more of the mech battalions and companies going into various parts of Baghdad. while the Special Operations Forces are going to be targeting specific regime targets as they pick up intelligence on where this hierarchy of the Ba'ath Party and the regime may be or where they're moving to.
Okay, General, hang with us if you can. We just want to see if we can get a better idea of what's going on now in Baghdad. Again, these are pictures taken earlier, not long ago. This was within the past half hour. These series of continuous explosions, some of which were big enough for our own military analysts to suggest were not done by the Iraqis, but possibly were from the air, maybe in bombing raids. Our own Mike Tobin is at CENTCOM in Doha, Qatar. There's one of those big bombs. Mike, are you hearing anything from CENTCOM about what these explosions are all about?
Well, one thing it's very important to note that U.S. Central Command will not report anything about sorties until the planes are safely back in their respective airports or air bases or back on the carriers. We do know from U.S. Central Command that planes are, in fact, in the air right now, as they have been 24 hours a day, conducting all sorts of missions. They go in and protect the bombers. They take out AAA sites. They have been working, again, around the clock. So it is quite possible that the coalition aircraft are responsible for some of the explosions that you're seeing there. U.S. Central Command just simply can't confirm what you are seeing right now on Abu Dhabi TV and the pictures that we're putting up in the air. It is quite possible that these explosions could be the result of what the Iraqis are doing on the ground and targeting the coalition forces that are there. Of course, if that was taking place, U.S. Central Command would have no information about that. So the latest that we're getting is really that anything is possible, and you're seeing the pictures right now that the explosions are taking place near the Al Rashid, which would put it all on the west side of the Tigris and just a few blocks away from the Information Ministry, where so much of the activity is located there in Baghdad, David.
Mike, I got a question that may be answered by our own General McInerney, our Air Force general, who we use as an analyst. But let me ask you, if you've heard about it, there's so many planes from so many services. You got Marine planes up, you got Army planes, et cetera, Navy planes. Is there any kind of air traffic control system that CENTCOM has a handle on so that planes literally don't bang into each other in the air?
There's a whole lot to that. U.S. Central Command has a joint operations center here where they can watch everybody out there on the battlefield, from the ground troops to the planes in the air. And I was talking with one of the pilots. One of the techniques they use, they just fly at different altitudes. So if you got guys coming in from one direction, they'll be lower than the guys, say guys are coming in from the west, possibly they'll be lower than the guys coming in from the east, and not the same as the guys coming in from the north. So that's one method of keeping the planes separated. But it's absolutely a massive air traffic control job, because you have planes coming in from all over the place. And even if you do have them separated by the altitudes, you have them dropping ordnance, which would pass through all those separate altitudes. So that's really when the noggins of these people are put to the test, who are there in the Joint Operations Center here at CENTCOM, up in the AWACS, and doing everything else they can to keep the planes separated.
All right, Mike Tobin, stand by if you can. General Paul Vallely, we thank you for your analysis as well. We want to go now to Kuwait City, next door to Iraq. Of course, what happens inside Iraq is of great interest to those folks who were once invaded by Saddam Hussein. Jonathan Hunt is standing by in Kuwait City for the latest. Jonathan?
Hi, David. The British grip on Basra, Iraq's second city, is being tightened by the hour. Liberation, according to British officials, is being delivered to the Iraqi people there, although those same officials caution that despite the military successes, some difficult days may still lie ahead. British troops have now moved into what they call the heart of Basra, and they say they're there to stay. Among the symbolic sites already secured by those British troops, the presidential palace compound, once the headquarters of the Fedayeen militia. Now, militia positions around that palace were softened up overnight by coalition airstrikes, and apparently by the time British troops entered the palace gates, there was very little sign of life. Right now, British forces are sweeping through what is known as the old part of Basra. They're doing that in light armoured vehicles and on foot. It's a dangerous mission, but they have to do it that way because of the narrow streets in that part of town. In other areas, though, of Basra, we have seen British forces patrolling in a very relaxed manner, some even with their helmets off, a clear sign that they believe they have those parts of the city at least completely secured. It is also adding to the confidence of the people of Basra that the Iraqi regime's rule in that city is finally over. That view also bolstered by news from the coalition that Saddam Hussein's cousin, Ali Hassan al-Majid, known more commonly as Chemical Ali, is almost certainly dead. Al-Majid, one of the most notorious members of Saddam Hussein's inner circle, responsible, it's believed, for the gassing of Kurds in northern Iraq in 1988. That attack was what earned him the nickname Chemical Ali. It apparently killed thousands of Kurds at the time. He's also been linked to the brutal crackdown on the Shiite population in the south after the 1991 Gulf War. Now, his home in Basra was targeted over the weekend by coalition aircraft, and coalition officials now believe that they did kill al-Majid in those strikes, and they believe that has sent a very powerful message.
The significance of the fact that Chemical Ali has gone will show the people of southern Iraq, Basra, which was his stronghold, that the regime is finished. It is over, and liberation is now here.
The feeling of freedom is certainly taking hold in Basra. We're now hearing reports of local people there turning on the remnants of the Iraqi militia and looting the state bank. All of this coming just about 2 weeks after British forces first surrounded the city. And a British official told me this afternoon here in Kuwait that it was bound to happen, but that the local people simply had to first realize that Saddam Hussein's, quote, Ba'ath Party goons were finally out of the picture. And that certainly seems to be the case right now in Basra, at least. That's the latest live from Kuwait City. Back to you in New York.
Amen to that. Jonathan Hunt, thanks very much. We're going to go right back to Rick Leventhal. He is outside of Baghdad. He's with the 1st Marines, and he's got some breaking info for us. Rick?
Well, just David, that Marines are also on the lookout for Ba'ath Party officials. There is some belief here that they may be trying to flee the city. So one of the tasks of the Marines' 3rd Light Armored Reconnaissance Battalion at this point is to try and catch Ba'ath Party officials if they should try to flee, David.
Have you seen any sign of that, Rick?
Well, we know that roadblocks are set up. We know that they are checking vehicles, but we haven't yet seen them actually find any of these officials, but they are tasked to try and do just that.
How do they disguise themselves, Rick? They must have long ago stripped off, maybe even burned their uniforms. What limits, to what extent do they go to try to disguise their identity?
I have no idea, David. I would imagine that they would try to do anything they could to hide who they are, but whether that will work will remain to be seen.
Because I guess the question, to put it more bluntly, I mean, how do you distinguish as a Marine between a civilian and somebody who might be a wolf in sheep's clothing?
Well, I don't quite know how to answer that without that sounded like a gunshot. Without giving up their tactics.
Yeah. Okay.
Except to say that they have been tasked. They have been given a set of things to look for, and that's what they're doing.
All right. Dumb of me to try to get tactics out of you. I'm glad you didn't answer that question. You were on guard. You said you heard a gunshot a moment ago?
It sounded like one. And I have heard, since we last spoke, several more either artillery shells or airstrikes off in the distance. But, these random shootings are obviously an ongoing concern here, David.
All right. Rick Leventhal is with the 1st Marines, 3rd Light Armored Reconnaissance Battalion. He is our eyes and ears outside of Baghdad as we continue to look at these shots taken about 30 minutes ago. These were a rapid succession of large explosions. Some of our military analysts, there you can see the camera actually shake at one of these explosions, perhaps so large that they might indicate one of the bigger bombings from the air. We don't know yet how many planes were in the air. There you see a massive explosion, but we do know that planes were out over Baghdad earlier, so this may be the result of that. The Iraqis, for what it's worth, and frankly it's not worth a heck of a lot, say that they are responsible for these explosions as they target U.S. snipers near the Al Rashid Hotel. But again, you got to take that with a huge grain of salt. Iraq, just one of 3 world conflicts on the agenda of President Bush and Prime Minister Tony Blair today. They are about to meet in Northern Ireland, and we go live now to Wendell Goler. He's in Belfast for a preview. Wendell?
David, the president's due here in about an hour for a roughly 20-hour summit with Prime Minister Tony Blair. As you say, they will talk about the war in Iraq and also about rebuilding that country, though their aides say that does not mean the two leaders think the war will soon be over. They'll also look at the Middle East peace process and also the effort to bring peace to Protestants and Catholics here in Northern Ireland. The president's brief visit here to Northern Ireland pays back Tony Blair for several lightning visits he's made to Washington over the past few months, two of them over the past couple of weeks. Their talks on post-war Iraq will focus on the role of the United Nations, and the two leaders have some differences there. President Bush wants the UN to handle little more than humanitarian aid distribution. Blair is pushing for a broader role, but not the controlling role that the French, Russians, and Germans have proposed. UN Secretary General Kofi Annan signaled just a short while ago even he doesn't see the UN administering Iraq as it did East Timor after the Indonesians left.
You have to be very careful here. Each crisis has its own peculiarities. Iraq is not East Timor and Iraq is not Kosovo. There are trained personnel, there is a reasonably effective civil service, there are engineers and others who can play a role in their own country. And as we've said before, Iraqis have to be responsible for their political future.
Aides say the two leaders' talks on the other two conflicts are important and interrelated. Prime Minister Blair has been pushing President Bush for weeks, if not months, to release the so-called roadmap for peace in the Middle East, the agreement worked out between the United States, the European Union, the United Nations, and Russia. The president announced several weeks ago, mostly as a concession to Blair, that he would release it as soon as the Palestinians' new prime minister has its cabinet in place. Also, Blair wants to nudge the Protestants and Catholics to implement the Good Friday Accords. He feels that could be a model for peace in the Middle East. David?
All right, Wendell Goler in Belfast. And coming up, more on those explosions in Baghdad. What's the cause? Of course, the Iraqis say they're the cause. That's what the Saddam regime says in its dying moments. We'll give you more information. Plus, the palaces of Saddam Hussein inside looks like you've never seen before, straight from the front. Coming up on Fox.
To word that he is dead.
Well, Wolf, really after Saddam Hussein, Ali Hassan al-Majid, or Chemical Ali as he's known up here, is the most hated man in the north. They blame him, as you mentioned, they blame him for the Halabja chemical attack that left 5,000 Kurds dead. They also blame him for the Anfal campaign carried out throughout the 1980s, really culminating at the end of the decade, which human rights organizations say left more than 100,000 Kurds dead, many more displaced. That campaign left also 4,000 Kurdish villages destroyed during that decade. So really a hated man. Many people here, when we passed on that news that the British forces reporting that Ali Hassan al-Majid was dead, very happy about that. Of course, that news has not been totally confirmed. One Kurdish officer I spoke with today said he will not be completely happy until he sees a picture of Ali Hassan al-Majid dead. But as I said, very positive reaction here among the Kurds to that news. Wolf?
Ben Wiedemann with the latest from up north, the northern part of Iraq. Thanks, Ben, very much. And we continue our special coverage of this war in Iraq in just a moment. We'll also keep our eyes over the skies of Baghdad as well as on the roads leading in and out of the Iraqi capital. We'll have all the latest developments right away. Stay with us.
For more on the war in Iraq, log on to CNN.com. Get reports from the front lines.
Huge explosions.
And all the facts and features you need to track the war. Plus, sign up for breaking news alerts and be the first to know. Log on and stay informed at CNN.com.
CNN, the most trusted name in news.
Here's a site in Baghdad and sounds of Baghdad. U.S. tanks pulling up to a presidential palace. in downtown Baghdad. They didn't only pull up there, they pulled up near the El Rashid Hotel, famous from the first Gulf War. They also pulled up near the Ministry of Information, other symbolic targets, sites in the Iraqi capital, clearly trying to make a point to the people of Baghdad as well as the remaining leadership of the Iraqi regime. The U.S. is on the scene and plans on staying there. We'll continue to watch what's happening in the Iraqi capital, but now let's get a recap of some of the other late-breaking developments in the war in Iraq.
2:58 a.m. Live pictures from the northern city of Mosul show huge fires and explosions from a burning ammunition dump. CNN's Jane Araf reports later that U.S. forces are trying to dislodge Iraqi fighters between Mosul and Kirkuk. 3:17 a.m. Associated Press quotes a British officer who says the body of Ali Hassan al-Majid has been found in Basra. Al-Majid, Saddam Hussein's cousin, is known as Chemical Ali because of his use of chemical weapons against Iraqi Kurds in 1988. 5:02 a.m. CNN's Walter Rogers reports U.S. Army sources tell him an Iraqi missile hit the Tactical Operations Center for the 2nd Brigade, 3rd Infantry, resulting in U.S. casualties. 6:45 a.m. President Bush departs the White House to travel to Northern Ireland for a summit meeting with his coalition partner, British Prime Minister Tony Blair. 7:20 a.m. U.S. Central Command says even though U.S. forces have taken over one of Saddam Hussein's presidential palaces, they're not hunting for any particular individual. Instead, says Brigadier General Vincent Brooks, the coalition is focused on the regime. Brooks also says he cannot confirm the death of Ali Hassan al-Majid. 9:17 a.m. Martin Savage, traveling with the 7th Marines, shows new video of U.S. Marines searching the Iraqi Atomic Energy Commission headquarters near Baghdad. A scientific team will analyze the substances found in laboratories there.
CNN's Heidi Collins reporting all the latest developments for us. Thanks very much to Heidi. Our special coverage of Operation Iraqi Freedom will continue in just a moment. We'll have a close look at mail call for some U.S. Marines. Getting a letter or package from home can mean everything when you're so many thousands of miles away and at war.
CNN's continuing coverage of the war in Iraq. The dangers of going house to house as U.S. Marines search for Fedayeen fighters. What would Iraq look like without Saddam Hussein? Some insight on the regime change. A live update from the Pentagon as U.S.-led forces enter and exit Baghdad at will. These stories and more today at 2 p.m. Eastern. Stay with CNN, the most trusted name in news.
Welcome back. Even in the middle of the war, even in the middle of the desert, Mom's care package from back home often has a way of making its way to U.S. Marines. Our Jason Bellini takes a look at what's being called mail call.
This is the best of times and the worst of times for the mail to arrive. The best because the Marines could benefit from a morale boost. The worst because the cookies, candy, magazines, and shaving supplies will only weigh down their packs further, just as the next mission, likely involving long, hard humps, awaits them. Corporal Nathan Floyd of North Vernon, Indiana, probably has the most to give away, receiving goodie boxes from his mom, his wife, and a woman he doesn't even know who sent Girl Scout cookies.
Girl Scouting is about caring.
Mail call is about talking with one another about home, about finding a few minutes alone, about making sure no one feels left out.
I haven't got mail at all.
It's nice everybody shares. That's cool.
Yeah. Everybody gets something, you know, from at least somebody else. Makes them feel better.
Not in spite of, but because of his family, Lance Corporal Joseph Wilczek is in Iraq,
telling everyone to be safe.
on the brink of likely combat.
September 11th, I lost 2 of my relatives in the bombing, and my sister was out wandering around the city that day, and I couldn't get in touch with my sister for like a week, so I really freaked out about that.
Today he opens an envelope from his mom, Rosemary.
Joseph, letters might not be so frequent, but always remember, we are very proud of what you are doing for our country. Love, Mom. That's cool. It means something. Yes. I needed this. Why? I haven't got a letter from my mom since I've been out here. And this really just makes my day a lot better right now. just lets me know that she still loves me and that she supports everything we're doing out here.
He says he'll keep his mom's note in his pocket while he and the rest of Gulf Company, to use a phrase often written in Marines' letters home, do what we've got to do. Jason Bellini, CNN, embedded with the 15th Marine Expeditionary Unit.
So the bottom line, if you have a loved one serving here in the Persian Gulf, serving and fighting in this war, keep those cards and letters and those packages oncoming. They'll be warmly received, I am sure. We're watching what's happening in the war, especially in and around Baghdad. U.S. troops now have the city virtually encircled. They're moving around. They're also moving in and out from key strategic locations. Within the past hour, we heard loud explosions. We're going to continue to watch what's happening on the streets of Baghdad as well as over the skies. Much more coverage coming up, including all the late-breaking developments. I'll be back with Judy Woodruff right after this.
Hello, everyone. I'm Heidi Collins. At this hour, a foothold established in the Iraqi capital. CNN's Walter Rogers reports some of the Americans who shot their way into Baghdad today are not withdrawing. Rogers reports 3 Army battalions are setting up positions inside the Iraqi capital. One American unit has hunkered down in a park after blasting a large statue of Saddam Hussein. On the northern front now, a huge set of explosions today in one of the major cities. CNN's Jane Araf reports the blasts occurred at a weapons dump in Mosul. That's a city on the target list of coalition warplanes. A British reporter in Nasiriyah says Iraqi exile Ahmed Shalabi is planning to march to Baghdad with several hundred fighters. Shalabi and his men were flown to Nasiriyah in coalition aircraft. Shalabi has the support of higher-ups at the Pentagon and is pushing for a role in post-war Iraq. President Bush is due to land in Belfast for his 3rd meeting in 3 weeks with British Prime Minister Tony Blair. Post-war Iraq is high on the leader's agenda, but administration officials say they'll also discuss the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and Northern Ireland. A good-sized rally on Wall Street today. The Dow Jones Industrial Average is up at about 176 now. The price of oil futures has dipped today. Of course, that means cheaper gas. And the dollar is gaining against other major currencies. I'm Heidi Collins in Atlanta. Stand by for Judy Woodruff in Washington and Wolf Blitzer in Kuwait City.
A huge blast outside Baghdad just a short time ago. U.S. Marines take out a bridge damaged in the heat of battle. Hello, I'm Wolf Blitzer reporting live from Kuwait City. United States forces seize a foothold in the Iraqi capital, and within the last hour, this city is rocked by explosions.
From CNN studios in Washington, I'm Judy Woodruff. Also ahead, what happens in Iraq after a regime change? What will the roles of the United States and possibly the UN be? We'll get in depth with that. Also ahead, going house to house, Marines on the front lines share what they are experiencing as they encounter Iraqis in door-to-door searches for enemy forces. Wolf, now back to you.
Thanks very much, Judy. More forcefully now than ever, U.S. forces are trying to show the Iraqi regime, at least what's left of it, that it has lost control of its own capital. For the first time tonight, American units are reportedly overnighting. They're staying overnight out in the open inside Baghdad. CNN's Barbara Starr is reporting the American military presence within the city is likely to grow. Here's another way of putting out the message that the old regime is dying. U.S. tanks parked today at Saddam Hussein's main presidential palace in Baghdad. And today's incursions into Baghdad produced several American casualties, but most resistance within the city is described as light or poorly organized. Just a short time ago, Marines blew up a bridge across the Tigris River. The bridge had been damaged in heavy fighting earlier in the day, fighting that claimed the lives of 2 Americans. The hunt for weapons of mass destruction continues. Marines seized the headquarters of Iraq's Atomic Energy Commission. And for the first time in nearly 3 weeks, at least some U.S. Marine units were told to remove their chemical protection gear. Also today, the life of luxury once enjoyed by Saddam Hussein. A little bit later, we'll take you on a tour of the Iraqi leader's ornate palace in the southern Iraqi city of Basra. As we mentioned, the U.S. Army's 3rd Infantry suffered losses today on Baghdad's southern outskirts, but only after dozens of their comrades took up positions inside the capital, positions they intend to hold on to. Our information comes from CNN's Walter Rogers. He's embedded in the 3rd Squadron, 7th U.S. Cavalry.
The casualty toll on that Iraqi rocket attack against a U.S. Army command post is now considerably higher than previously reported. We're told there are 15 U.S. soldiers wounded, some of them quite seriously, and we're also told there were 4 dead in that attack. 2 of the dead are said to be journalists. What apparently happened was that the 2nd Brigade, 3rd Infantry Division command post was set up south of the city. This while other units of the 2nd Brigade rolled into Baghdad again this morning. An Iraqi approached the area with a missile, fired the missile, and took a terrible toll on U.S. soldiers, again with a single rocket. Of course, this is in response to, or the price that is paid for, more U.S. tanks rolling into Baghdad. CNN has been told by U.S. Army sources there are now 3 battalions of the 2nd Brigade, 3rd Infantry inside Baghdad, and those 3 battalions are not there on a temporary foray as in the previous 2 days. Those 3 battalions intend to stay in the city and occupy it, this according to U.S. Army sources. Walter Rogers, CNN, with the U.S. 7th Cavalry on the outskirts of Baghdad.
Well, there's not only stiff opposition where the Army's coming in from the south, there is equally fierce opposition as U.S. Marines close in on Baghdad from the east. 2 Marines with the 3rd Battalion, 4th Marines, are reported dead. Their armored personnel carrier hit as it crossed a canal bridge near the Tigris River. A short while ago, the Marines blew up that bridge, and we watched it happen along with CNN's Martin Savage. He is with the 1st Battalion, 7th Marines, and for those of you who missed it, we want to show it to you again.
Yeah, I would say the concussive force just from this vantage point was pretty strong. And now we're going to wait and see just to make sure nothing's going to come flying out of the blue onto our head. The smoke has completely obliterated the bridge site, and the flash was so intense I'm having a hard time focusing my eyes, but we will give it a few seconds here to wait for the smoke to clear. I got a cheer from the Marines. They obviously were impressed by that. Clearly the demolition guys didn't hold back on any of their charges on this, judging by the force of the explosion and the way we felt it here. We're just looking to wait for the smoke to clear, but I think you could probably safely say, judging by that, it's been mission accomplished. Now, the idea was not to bring down the whole bridge, just bring down that...
Martin Savage's report filed not very long ago. We're also told that the Marines are crossing this river, able to cross the river on a temporary span they built before they destroyed the damaged bridge.